Stephen Stills challenged Jimi Hendrix to prove himself as a rhythm guitarist. What happened next changed how everyone understood the guitar. June 1967, Monterey Pop Festival. The backstage area behind the main stage was controlled chaos. Bands everywhere, equipment cases stacked like walls, cables running across the ground like veins. The smell of cigarettes, sweat, and amplifier tubes warming up filled the air. This was the first major American rock festival, and everyone who mattered in music was there. Stephen Stills arrived with the rest of Buffalo Springfield around 4 p.m. They were scheduled to play later that evening. At 22 years old, Stills was already recognized as one of rock's most complete guitarists. Not just a player, but a craftsman who understood song structure, arrangement, the architecture of music. He could play lead when needed, but his real strength was rhythm. That driving, percussive, hypnotic rhythm that made Buffalo Springfield sound so distinctive. Songs like For What It's Worth were built on his rhythm foundation. Stills took pride in being a rhythm player in an era obsessed with lead guitarists. While everyone wanted to be a Clapton or a Beck, playing flashy solos and getting all the attention, Stills understood that rhythm was what held songs together. Rhythm was the backbone. Lead was just decoration on top of someone else's hard work. The backstage jam room was a small space, maybe 15 by 20 feet, with a couple of practice amps set up in the corner. Musicians would wander in and out, playing together, showing off, networking. It was informal, competitive in a friendly way. Your reputation could be made or broken in these casual sessions. Stills walked in around 5 p.m., carrying his Gibson. Neil Young was already there, sitting on an amp, tuning. A few members of The Who were scattered around talking. Someone from the Byrds. A couple of journalists with notebooks, always hunting for stories. Then Jimi Hendrix walked in. Stills had heard about Jimi, everyone had. The American guitarist who'd conquered London, who played guitar with his teeth and behind his head, who set his instrument on fire. The flashy showman, the spectacle. Are You Experienced had just been released in America a few weeks earlier, and it was all anyone talked about. Purple Haze was getting radio play, and people were losing their minds over it. Stills respected the musicianship, but he had reservations. Jimi seemed like a lead guitarist, a spotlight guy. All those solos, all that feedback, all that flash. It was impressive, sure, but where was the discipline? Where was the band musicianship? Where was the understanding that sometimes the best thing a guitarist can do is hold down a solid rhythm and let the song breathe? Jimi was wearing a bright patterned shirt, his white Stratocaster in hand. He nodded at people, quiet, not pushing himself into the center of attention. He found a spot in the corner, plugged in, and started playing softly to himself. Just noodling, exploring sounds, not performing for anyone. Stills watched him for a few minutes. The tone was incredible. That much was obvious. Jimi's touch on the guitar was something else, the way he controlled feedback and sustain. But it was all lead-oriented, melody, texture, solos. Where was the rhythm? Someone suggested they all play together, just a loose jam. A few people agreed. They settled on a basic blues progression in E, something everyone knew. Stills started laying down the rhythm, that chunky percussive style he'd perfected. Solid, driving, unshakable. The foundation. Jimi played lead over it. Typical. He sounded good, obviously, finding interesting lines, bending strings in ways that made them cry, but it was what Stills expected. Lead, spotlight, flash. After a few minutes, they stopped. People nodded appreciatively. It had sounded good. Stills felt that familiar satisfaction of knowing his rhythm work had held everything together, had given Jimi's lead something solid to stand on. "Nice tone," Stills said to Jimi, genuine but casual. "Thanks," Jimi replied quietly. "Your rhythm's solid." Stills smiled. Here was his opening. Not mean, not aggressive, but competitive in the way musicians are with each other. "Lead's easy," Stills said, loud enough for the room to hear. "You get to play whatever you want, take the spotlight, make it about you. Rhythm's the hard part. Rhythm's what holds the song together. Rhythm's what makes everyone else sound good." The room got a bit quieter. People sensed something happening. "You think so?" Jimmy said, his voice still quiet. I know so, Stills said. Most lead players can't play rhythm to save their lives. They're too used to being the center of attention. They don't know how to serve the song, how to be part of the band instead of above it. Jimmy didn't respond immediately. He adjusted his guitar strap, tuned a string that didn't need tuning. Want to try it? Stills said. I'll play lead for once. You hold down the rhythm. Let's see if you can do it without all the flash and feedback. Neil Young, who knew Stills well, shifted uncomfortably. He recognized this mood. Stills was testing someone, challenging them. Sure, Jimmy said simply. They switched roles. Stills would play lead, Jimmy would play rhythm. Same progression, same key. E blues, nothing fancy. Stills started first, laying down a lead line, showing what a real musician could do when they took the spotlight. Clean, melodic, tasteful. He played with authority, confident in his ability. Then he waited for Jimmy to come in with the rhythm. What happened next confused Stills at first. Jimmy didn't play the standard rhythm pattern Stills had been playing earlier. He didn't do the chunky, percussive thing that every rhythm guitarist in rock was doing. Instead, he played something Stills had never heard before. It was rhythm, definitely rhythm, holding down the progression, keeping time. But it was also melody. It was also texture. It was somehow both background and foreground at the same time. Jimmy played chord fragments, not full chords. 2 strings here, 3 strings there. He let strings ring open while fretting others, creating a shifting harmonic landscape underneath Stills' lead. He played counter rhythms, syncopated patterns that didn't compete with the main beat but enhanced it, made it more complex, more interesting. Neil Young stopped tuning his guitar and just listened. Pete Townshend leaned forward, watching Jimmy's hands with absolute focus. Stills kept playing his lead line, but he was distracted now, listening to what Jimmy was doing underneath. It was making Stills' lead sound better, richer, more musical. The rhythm wasn't just holding space for the lead anymore. It was conversing with it, challenging it, supporting it, pushing it. Then Stills realized something uncomfortable. His lead line suddenly sounded simple, basic, ordinary, not because he was playing badly, but because Jimmy's rhythm was so interesting that it made the lead seem unnecessary. Stills tried to play something more complex, more impressive, but everything he played seemed to clash with what Jimmy was doing. The more Stills tried to take control, the more he felt lost. He stopped playing, just stopped, put his hands on the strings to mute them, and he listened. Jimmy kept playing rhythm by himself for maybe 10 seconds. And in those 10 seconds, without any lead guitar at all, the room heard something complete. The rhythm alone was musical. It didn't need decoration. It didn't need a lead guitarist to make it interesting. It was already interesting. Jimmy stopped. Nobody said anything for a moment. Stills looked at his guitar, then at Jimmy, then back at his guitar. His face showed something between confusion and revelation. What was that? Stills finally said. Rhythm, Jimmy said quietly. Just rhythm? That wasn't just rhythm, Stills said. That was something else. It's both, Jimmy replied. Doesn't have to be one or the other. Pete Townshend, who'd been watching from the side, spoke up. I've never heard rhythm played like that. Neil Young was staring at Jimmy's hands like they were alien objects. Stills sat down on an amp case. He wasn't angry, wasn't defensive. He was processing. I thought I understood rhythm guitar, Stills said, more to himself than to anyone else. I thought rhythm was about holding down the progression, being steady, being the foundation, just that. It is that, Jimmy said, but it can also be more. Show me again, Stills said. Jimmy played the same thing, slower this time so Stills could watch his hands. The fingers moved across the fretboard in patterns that seemed simple but created complex sounds. Open strings ringing while fretted notes moved around them. Partial chords, not full bar chords. Space between the notes, letting the guitar breathe. You're playing melody and rhythm at the same time, Stills said, watching closely. Yeah, Jimmy said. It's just another way to think about it. It makes lead guitar seem kind of pointless, Stills admitted. No, Jimmy said. Lead's still lead. This is just another option. Different tool for different purposes. They played together again, but differently now. Stills played rhythm the way he always had. and Jimi played that hybrid thing he just demonstrated. Two guitars, two approaches to rhythm, creating something neither could do alone. It sounded incredible. The room knew it. You could see it in the faces of the other musicians, that recognition of witnessing something new. When they finished, there was quiet appreciation. Not wild applause, but the respectful acknowledgement musicians give when they've seen mastery. Stephen Stills and Jimi Hendrix talked for another 20 minutes in that backstage room. Stills asked questions. Jimi answered them generously without ego, showing Stills where the voicings came from, how the patterns worked. Other guitarists gathered around, watching, learning. This was Monterey 1967, the peak of the San Francisco music scene, and everyone was teaching everyone else in these compressed moments of creative exchange. Years later, in a 1978 interview with Guitar Player magazine, Stephen Stills told this story with a mixture of humor and genuine gratitude. "I thought I knew what rhythm guitar was," Stills said, leaning back in his chair, acoustic guitar resting on his lap. "I'd built my whole identity around being a great rhythm player in a world obsessed with lead. I was proud of it, defensive about it even. Rhythm players were underrated, underappreciated, and I was going to be the guy who proved rhythm was just as important as lead. Maybe more important." He paused, smiled at the memory. "Then Jimi showed me rhythm could be so much more than I'd imagined. He didn't play rhythm versus lead. He didn't think in those categories at all. He played music. The distinction I'd been so proud of mastering, that I'd built my whole approach around, didn't exist for him. He transcended it without even trying." The interviewer asked, "Did it bother you that he was better?" Stills laughed, a genuine sound. "At first, maybe. Your ego takes a hit when someone shows you that your specialty, the thing you thought you'd mastered, isn't what you thought it was. I walked around Monterey that evening feeling kind of lost, questioning everything I'd worked on for years. But then it became liberating. I didn't have to choose between rhythm and lead anymore. I didn't have to defend one against the other. I could explore the space between them, the gray area where Jimi lived." "Did you incorporate what he showed you into your own playing?" "Absolutely," Stills said, picking up his guitar and demonstrating. "Listen to Crosby, Stills, and Nash records. Sweet, Judy Blue Eyes, for example. You'll hear me using those open string voicings, those partial chords, that approach to rhythm that's also melodic, that serves the song but doesn't disappear into it. That came directly from watching Jimi that day in Monterey. He didn't just show me a new technique, a few new chord shapes. He showed me a new way of thinking about the instrument, about what a guitar part could be and do." David Crosby, who heard about the encounter later, said in an interview, "Stephen came back from Monterey different, more open, less rigid about what guitar parts should be. Jimi did that to a lot of guitarists. He made you reconsider everything." When Jimi died in September 1970, Stills was performing in Los Angeles. He heard the news backstage and had to sit down for 20 minutes before he could continue. At the show that night, he dedicated the set to Jimi and played a version of Carry On that incorporated those rhythmic ideas Jimi had shown him 3 years earlier. "I owe him for that conversation in Monterey," Stills said years later. "I challenged him because I thought lead players didn't understand rhythm. He showed me I was the one who didn't understand. Rhythm wasn't just the foundation. It could be everything." The story became part of Monterey folklore. Musicians who were there told it for years. How Stephen Stills challenged Jimi Hendrix to prove himself as a rhythm player, and Jimi responded by erasing the distinction between rhythm and lead entirely. It's a story about assumptions, about categories, about how the best artists don't fit into the boxes we create for them. Stills thought he'd mastered rhythm guitar. Jimi showed him rhythm guitar had possibilities Stills hadn't imagined. And Stills, to his credit, didn't get defensive. He got curious. He learned. He grew. That's what happens when two great artists meet with open minds and healthy egos. Both become better than they were. Stephen Stills challenged Jimi to play rhythm. Jimi played rhythm so completely, so musically, that the challenge itself became meaningless. And both musicians and everyone watching understood something new about what a guitar could do.